In late last year, we saw a shift, and this is a very fundamental shift where that control is inverted. So in the past, there was this synchronous, look at the code that comes out, change it as it comes out, ask the chat for it to be changed. Now you just give a task and you walk away. What I've been reminding folks of in my team and what I kind of been reflecting on is the fundamentals really matter. Like all this time, if you kind of allowed yourself not to get it right, go back to it and get it right this time. Within this group, 90% of the people, 90% of our engineers are using some form of AI coding assistance daily.
AI can make a one-person founder company and they can just capture the market. Is that even possible? Could somebody just come up with a mobile app and be a real competitor to Grab? Suthen, welcome to AI Across Borders.
Thank you for having me, Ayesha.
It's such a pleasure to have you. I came in a Grab to the studio. So we have Grab everywhere in Singapore, in Southeast Asia. But for those of our audience who are not familiar with it, could you talk a little bit about what Grab is?
So Grab is a super app. And what that means is we endeavor to provide multiple services in a single application. And this cuts across three main customer groups, primarily consumers. So those are the main users who consume products on our application, served by both driver partners, our drivers, as well as merchants. And we offer a range of services. The biggest among them are on-demand services. So you can hail a ride on Grab, you can order food on Grab, you can send a parcel on Grab. But we also offer financial services where you're able to pay with Grab cashlessly, both on Grab for our services, but also if you go to a restaurant or a store, you can buy things with Grab. Beyond the financial service of just payment, we also offer things like lending, so credit services, insurance, and many others. And many of these services are offered to all three sides of our marketplace, both to consumers, so that's most people. We have about 50 million of those across in our platform today. And beyond that, we also have our driver partners and merchants also use both our on-demand products. So they either service and give rides or deliver food, or they also use our financial services in using our financial products like loans and insurance as well.
Wow. So before we talk about Grab and your work there, tell me a little bit about your own background.
I'm a software engineering both by training and for most of the years in my profession as well. I've worked in the industry for about 20 years now, 21 years going on. However, I did briefly, for my master's, actually take a detour away from software engineering, where I did a master's in public policy.
Wow, really?
Yes. So it's a bit different from the domain that I'm in. And it was because I wanted to become more well-rounded. I wanted to learn about the other aspect beyond just software dimensions of humanities, economics, politics, and philosophy. And also the motivation at the time was I wanted to initially work in the space of GovTech. So I felt I had the software engineering background. I knew how to write software, but I didn't know so much about policy and how it was made and how to interact with it. So I thought I needed to kind of have a more well-rounded education.
And that's so important. I mean, you are the chief technology officer of this massive platform. But increasingly in an AI world, the new individual profile is one that has humanities, policy, and the tech background. Are these the kind of people you think will increasingly be part of a tech team that are these well-rounded individuals like yourself?
I think there's a space for all kinds of individuals. I think what you're going to find is there's a set of folks who are, both well-rounded. They have a diverse set of skills. They're able to work across different domains and contribute meaningfully in them. So, this is the whole jack of all trades, right? Mm-hmm. So I think those folks will find themselves in the world of AI quite empowered because to where the depth of their skills is limited by kind of them being multi-skilled, they can be complemented and augmented with AI. Having said that, I think there's also going to be spaces where deep technical skills continue to matter. I mean, AI can accelerate things, it can help build things, but ultimately accountability chains still end with humans. And that means you need to understand how something works. And to the degree people don't understand how something works, that kind of removes the ability to be accountable, to responsibly contribute. And in some cases, some things might be really sophisticated. They might be really complicated. That deep technical expertise is necessary both to understand how they work and also understand when they don't work and how to fix it.
I think, Suthen, that's so important and widely misunderstood when it comes to AI, that it's just going to replace every job. especially in the tech sector, because I feel people underestimate that the AI needs to be managed, governed, set up architecturally properly. Are you finding that a lot of your team is using AI now for its work, and it's finding how much productivity boost is the engineering team getting at Grab from AI?
Let's talk about just the teams I'm responsible for, which are the engineering, machine learning, and technical program management teams. Within this group, 90% of the people, 90% of our engineers are using some form of AI coding assistance daily. This could be in terms of just your IDE-based assistants like Cursor or GitHub Copilot, those tools. But a lot of them also are using Claude Code and Codex and many of these agentic coding tools as well. So that's a very healthy adoption rate from our perspective. And we also didn't mandate anything. So there was no like compulsion. We didn't say you have to use it. This was very much making the tools available, teaching people the skills on how to use them effectively, and then cutting them loose. And people found that it was so helpful for their own productivity that they took it up. In terms of the outcomes that we're seeing from that, now I'll say engineering productivity always has a bunch of caveats and asterisks by it. There's been no real way to kind of say we're more productive. And ultimately, it comes down to the growth of the company and the impact that's created for customers. But from the perspective of the proxies we use, like merge requests, and that's kind of the number of changes that go to production that get put in our code base, we're seeing about a 40% increase in the number of merge requests per person. So that's pretty substantial. Beyond that, when we look last year at kind of turnaround time on tasks, how long does it take for someone to get something done? For similar size tasks, we're seeing that typically a 20 to 30% reduction in the turnaround time. Now, taking a step back, though, we think engineering productivity is just a small part of overall productivity. Ultimately, using AI effectively requires institutional change, even as we improve individual productivity. So that's where a lot of our focus is going next as well.
When you're interviewing people for your team, what are the skills that you're now looking for that would encapsulate these values that you want to inculcate in your team, but also just show that they're AI ready? Just 3 things that you're looking for.
Yeah. So I think the first is they still have to have the fundamentals. There isn't a version for us of software engineering where someone walks in and they're saying, I could ask an agent to do this, but I don't know what it's done. Right? So that's number one. So software engineering fundamentals still matter. So the way we describe this in the context of our career ladder is all those things that we expect in terms of the fundamentals, the leadership roles, the technical skills, all of that still required. Second is AI fluency and appetite to use AI. So they need to be like, you cannot come in and say, oh yeah, I don't know what this is. I don't know how to use it. I've never used it before. That will not meet the bar anymore today. The final thing we look at, which I think was valuable in a world even before AI, but it's even more valuable now, is a sense of agency and ownership. This sense that I have a responsibility to do things. I have initiative. I can change things around me. And these tools have given me more leverage to do so. The sense that of kind of really looking kind of, there's this value of like act like an owner. That's exactly what we look for when folks come in. Yeah? Not just waiting for instructions or opportunities to be handed over, but rather going, what can I do to move Grab forward in a way that's great for its customers?
And just like you are encouraging all of your engineers to learn about business, how are you bringing AI to the rest of the organization?
Yeah, so this has actually been one of the most exciting things about AI for us. It's really democratized this field of software to people who haven't traditionally had fluency in software development and software engineering. And we're seeing organizations who don't have a software engineering background actually build tools for themselves to enhance their own productivity. I think Anthony is actually he's attempted successfully actually to make a change to our production systems. But beyond that, he actually uses these tools to build simulations or models just for business conversations. To look at the sensitivity. So I'll give you 2 examples. Let me start with the legal team. Our legal team built a tool like an NDA reviewer tool that allows them to cut down the review time from a couple of hours or so to minutes. So it's like a first pass review where it looks through the NDA and kind of flags any major issues, and then the lawyer can kind of look at it and just check for anything else. But it really cut down the time for them to turn around reviews, which is good, of course, for those who are waiting on them, but also great for their own productivity. Similarly, on the design side, our design team actually came up, and you might have seen this if you've visited the office before, came up with a tool called Mosaic. What Mosaic allows our design team to do is generate illustrations in the Grab style, using either a prompt or you can put a photograph in it. So you can imagine this is a real crowd grabber or attention grabber because you put in a photo of a visitor and you get your Grab style kind of photo of that, right? But what was really cool about this is, typically, this is work that would have required a human to illustrate around these contexts with this, this brief given before that might have taken a day or two for the designer to finish the illustration. Now this work can be done in minutes.
And once they create it, does your team get involved, or they do it end to end? And do you have some training program for the non-techies for that?
I think it depends on the use case. We actually look at it from the perspective of, at the end of the day, of like what is the end goal and who is the customer for this product. So where something is kind of developed or incubated as an idea by a non-technical person, but then ultimately we go like, wow, actually this is going to be rolled out to our customers, to where the impact of errors or problems could be huge. Then our engineering teams get involved and they kind of work through it to kind of really bring it up to production quality. But if it's really for internal use, it's really for someone just using it for themselves, and it's working just fine, then we don't want our engineering team to kind of be gatekeepers or blockers. The whole goal of this AI assisted coding or agentic coding is to democratize things. And if you have to have someone like myself or someone in my teams sign off on something, it really doesn't empower people that much. So we kind of adopt this mental model that if it's going to go out in production, if our end customers are going to be exposed to this, then of course it needs a review by people who are production engineers. So for example, Anthony's code change was reviewed by engineers, and we have actually about half of our designers even today are making small fixes in our production environment, right? So they write the initial changes, small UI fixes. Designers have this wonderful obsession with making sure what shows up in front of our customers looks really good, and sometimes they're kind of stuck in trying to kind of manifest or materialize that obsession because the engineering bandwidth isn't there. Now they can make the changes themselves, and then what engineers do is they just review the change to make sure it's okay, and then it makes it to production.
And your CEO actually did some of that.
Yeah, he made a small fix as well.
But that's incredible, because a lot of these leaders are sometimes reading Harvard Business Review, or they are just getting briefed, but fundamentally they're not experimenting with it themselves, which I think unless you do that, you can't feel its power.
Oh, that's absolutely right. I think in this whole, one thing to, when you look at in terms of this inflection that we're seeing in terms of artificial intelligence, is the honest answer to any question is no one maybe fully knows, and what is true today might change tomorrow. And therefore, the only way to fully embrace this technology is to be regularly using it, to kind of build fluency, to kind of build an individual feel of how it works, where it doesn't work as well, and where it might work in the future.
I heard about something called GrabGPT. What is that? Is that ChatGPT, or how is it different?
It's a little different from ChatGPT. So let me kind of tell you, actually, this is a story of like a failure or a challenge that kind of both became successful, but successful in an unexpected way. So actually, the origin of GrabGPT was actually not even related to ChatGPT or building something, a chat interface for AI models, but rather what some of our teams were trying to do. So we have an infrastructure team that everyone depends on. And when everyone depends on you, they have a lot of questions and queries for you. So what they were trying to do was be able to handle these queries automatically with AI assistance. And they were building chatbots with this tool where someone could ask a question and the chatbot would answer the question before a human could get around to it. And hopefully that answer would be satisfactory. This actually originally didn't work. It was actually not working so well. But the same team adapted this framework in order to build an in-house interface to allow users to chat with large language models. And this was back in 2023 and 2022, 2023. If you remember that period of time, a lot of these frontier model companies, this is when ChatGPT was really taking off, right? Late 2022. There weren't really enterprise guarantees. There was no enterprise product. Security was a bit of a question. I think there were cases where people found that their conversations or meeting minutes or internal company data that they had discussed with ChatGPT was showing up in the training data. You could uncover it later on. So for those reasons, what we wanted to do is we said, hey, people really want to use this tool, but how do we make sure we are able to provide a safe and secure way to do it? So we built GrabGPT. And GrabGPT is basically, for most people in Grab, they're able to chat with large language models the same way you can with a lot of these chat applications. Now, what's unique is, despite the name, it's not just using OpenAI's GPT series. You can use all the closed-weight models from Frontier Labs, so Gemini, Claude, as well as GPT. Also open weights models like Kimi, as well as Qwen. So you can use a whole set of models to kind of test them out and chat with them. But beyond just the UI layer, the chat layer, GrabGPT actually plays a critical role in the organization as a router. It's our abstraction layer to different models. It allows us to maintain a flexible strategy of moving from model to model in terms of what is the best tool for the job. It also allows us to have security because we have the ability to connect. We can monitor things. It has an audit log. It also allows just proper governance. We can onboard models in a controlled fashion. We can meter usage. We can control cost. So it's been a transformative tool in enabling AI or generative AI adoption at Grab.
Now I understand, because you said they can use all these tools, and I was going to ask you, how do you kind of govern it? But you have this layer on top.
That's right.
That allows them total flexibility, but they can't violate any of the policies.
Correct. So whether it's an end user just chatting through a web browser interface, or someone building an LLM or generative AI, frontier model powered application, that traffic is routed through through GrabGPT. So like our merchant AI assistant, as well as our driver coach and our consumer AI assistant, all of these that we kind of shared at GrabX recently, all of these direct their traffic to the frontier model labs or the model provider through GrabGPT.
And when you think about like mobility or even you think about grocery services, we see a lot of these robots coming. And I know that you recently are thinking of some other kinds of mechanisms by which to serve your customers. Can you talk a little bit about some of the innovations in robotics and how that would impact both your customers and your drivers?
Yeah. So an area of innovation that we're seeing with robotics that we think we can really create value for both sides of our marketplace has been in autonomous delivery robots. And to kind of understand where you can create value with these robots, it's helpful to kind of just characterize the journey that food takes when you order it all the way when it gets to you to eat it. And I assume you're a GrabFood customer as well.
100%.
Yeah. So, you order the food. Now, of course, what we describe the full journey as counter to couch. And what that means is when you make the order, a driver goes to the restaurant, picks up the food off the counter. But when they go to the restaurant to pick the food off the counter, actually what's happening is initially they get the order, they have to ride to the area the restaurant is in. They have to park their motorcycle or their vehicle, get off. So they stop at the curb, they get off the bike, a parking area or maybe some other space. They walk into the restaurant, they take the food off the counter, bring it back to the bike, load it into their bag, ride curb to curb, so they ride up to your curb. And if you live in a condominium or a large development, they have to get off the bike again and go up to you. Now, if you think of the counter to curb stage, the best possible version is, of course, like the restaurant is right next to the counter, it's a drive-through. But most of the time, actually, these restaurants are in large structures. They're in malls. They have to walk quite a bit, right? And also on the other end, curb to couch, your condominium or many developments in Southeast Asia can be quite large. And so drivers spend a lot of time walking. We see our robots being able to add value in all stages of this journey. So let's talk about the counter to curb stage. Imagine instead of the driver, when they reach, the shopping mall where the restaurant is located, where your food is being prepared, instead of having to get off the bike, spend time walking to the restaurant, taking the food from the counter and walking back to the bike. A robot could be loaded with the food by the restaurant, at the counter, the robot goes to the curb, and the driver meets the robot at the curbside. They take the food out of the robot, they carry it with them, or curb to curb, and then they deliver it to you. And you can imagine on the other end, curb to couch, if you're in a hotel, for example, or a large built-up area, we have a robot on that end where instead of getting off the bike and walking up to your condominium or to your room door and delivering the food, the driver can put it into the robot, and the robot delivers it to your door. So it handles the first and last, meters, I would say, of that journey. Actually, this is not just hypothetical in the sense of the benefit. 10% of our driver time goes to these stages of the journey, right? So it's a huge efficiency gain for them, because if they're spending more time kind of just riding curb to curb, they're able to do more orders per online hour on the platform, which then increases their earnings. So the way we see these robots is kind of a superhuman extension, right? It complements what our drivers do today in order to improve their efficiency on the platform.
That's fascinating. And are these already in operation in Southeast Asia, or is this an experiment?
We are exploring the operations, but there's still a few things to be worked through in terms of the rules, the regulations, finding an area that works, and so on. So that's what we're working on. However, I'm also happy to share that in terms of autonomous vehicles, our deployment in Punggol, our pilot with AIR, has been open to the public since April 1st. And that anyone can try it, including yourself. And again, this is part of, our long-term vision to augment our driver partners. Our view of the future in terms of how we handle the servicing of rides is it's going to be a hybrid fleet. Human driver partners, as well as autonomous vehicles, autonomous mobile robots will help serve customer needs, will help handle customer demand. In terms of autonomous vehicles, we think it's going to be a bit of a journey before it expands more widespread in Southeast Asia. There's challenges around both the unit economics, the cost structure, as well as just adapting these autonomous vehicles to the diversity of Southeast Asian conditions. I mean, you've seen the weather here,
yes.
But also just, in Thailand, there are tuk-tuks, there are various forms of vehicles, and just most Southeast Asian cities are just packed with motorbikes and bicycles that ride on the main roads, right? There aren't dedicated bicycle lanes. So these are all the adaptations we see that need to be done in order for autonomous vehicles to be introduced to Southeast Asia.
And so then do autonomous robots and autonomous vehicles, do they come under your department? And if so, what are the kinds of people you're hiring now? Is there a different robotics unit now under your wing?
Yeah. So in terms of autonomous, we have different approaches for each of those sets of, robotics. In terms of autonomous delivery robots, we have an in-house team that's under me that works on actually end-to-end building of those robots. We see the future, of course, of a company like Grab, bits to atoms company like Grab, really needing to be fluent and master robotics. And so we see these autonomous robots as part of our efforts to get in that direction and create value. So the delivery robots are built in-house. We have our own team. And the skills we look for there are folks who are both fluent in hardware engineering and some software engineering as well, but also machine learning. This is from perception to planning to control, the systems that create the brain of these robots. For autonomous vehicles, we have a bit of a different strategy. We've opted for actually a multi-partner strategy where instead of building in-house, we aim to use these autonomous vehicles, but really make them fit into our marketplace in a way that adds value to our customers.
This is the interesting thing. Like, if I was to ask you, people say AI can make a one-person founder company and they can just capture the market. Is that even possible? Could somebody just come up with a mobile app and get all these people on and put some hardware together just because the cost is going down, everybody's more productive, and be a real competitor to Grab?
In terms of building something like Grab, I'd say a couple of things. One, maybe like the superficial aspects of the company, like if you could say, hey, replicate the application, could I create the UI and stuff like that? Probably possible for a small group of individuals, or even a single individual with AI to do that. But this is where I kind of would say there's so much more to Grab than just that. A often a lot of the magic that you see, what you see in the application is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of work that goes under the hood that captures, beyond that 80% of what required, what is the remaining 20%, and what is that remaining 20% when you're doing millions of transactions a day, when you're serving millions of customers, right? How do you ensure you're able to deliver that service in a safe, stable, and a secure way? And I'd say that becomes a bit more challenging to replicate, right? But I think, of course, what I look at with this inflection with AI and agentic engineering, it's an invitation that we should take to relook at how we do things, regardless of whether your organization is big or small, right? Relook at how things are built, how things are delivered in terms of value to customers, and say, hey, can we do it differently with this technology?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you, Suthen. People think that it's easy to replicate because they're just looking at the user interface. But the trust, the scale, the security, the data that allows you to personalize, that only comes if you've done the hard work of building it over years. What about security? Let's talk about that and then about AI agents. You have these robots running around, you have this AI that you're putting in. How important is governance and security to you? And what are some of the regulations that you have to navigate around Southeast Asia?
And just thinking about AI in general, I think a useful mental model to adopt is it's an amplifier. It's an amplifier of everything. It's a bit indiscriminate on that level, right? That's how, if you have great software engineering practices, if your code is clean, if your fundamentals are strong, it will amplify that aspect. And to your question on security and risk, if there was latent risk in your system, right? And this is both internal, so if you have agents operating internally, but also external threat actors and so on, that risk is now amplified. What I tell a lot of our teams is you need to start thinking in the context of latent risk. So these vulnerabilities may have always been there, but the ability to access them, to exploit them, may have been more challenging because they were unreachable from the outside, for example, right? But now you have an agent that acts in a non-deterministic way. If something was insecure, some of that non-deterministic behavior might involve exposing that vulnerability to the outside world. And this is where that whole point came about accountability. You need to know what the agent is doing. This is where skill is important, that you cannot just YOLO code into production and hope for the best, right? And so that's one dimension of this. I think it's really important for organizations to look through their systems up and down. And this is something people say, like, you should have been doing it before, but now there's an urgency to really make sure you're squeezing out latent risk, that you're thinking about it from the perspective of what were the best practices that maybe we didn't quite follow for expediency or because we didn't know. That debt needs to be paid down.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting because, with Anthropic and the new model, Mythos,
yes.
Right? So that's it precisely to your point, that model goes in and finds like bugs that have been around for 27 years that were hidden in some ways because the humans couldn't understand them or discover them. And we see so many legacy systems everywhere, like banking and others, that would be exposed, perhaps less so with the kind of a more tech-native company like Grab.
This whole of systems view that models have and the ability to persist at a task really makes them, I guess, on some level frightening, but also on the flip side, a powerful tool to help, fix the problem. So, I talked about this idea of amplification of risk and also amplification of benefits. But one thing we've also been embracing is these tools can be used to help squeeze down risk more quickly. AI code reviews, AI system reviews, right? Especially if structured correctly, if you create the context correctly for these agents to act, can allow you to kind of stay ahead, to kind of, instead of in the past, this debt you had to pay down, these issues you had to address, were bandwidth constrained by what your software engineers could take up. Well, now your bandwidth has also been amplified. So I think it's going to be a dynamic situation where, you'll have more vulnerabilities being uncovered, more vulnerabilities potentially, being able to be exploited because the barrier to entry has reduced. I think one thing about Mythos that was interesting is security firms were able to replicate the findings with simpler open weight models, right, and so on. So, it's not kind of, Mythos's capabilities are impressive, but it's not these outcomes are not exclusive. But that also means that the defensive capabilities can evolve on some level as well. And I think teams need to use it in order to look up and down their software stacks to just identify these areas of improvement. And what I've been reminding folks of in my team and what I kind of been reflecting on is the fundamentals really matter. Like all this time, if you kind of allowed yourself not to get it right, go back to it and get it right this time.
Let's talk about AI agents. How are you using them at Grab? Where do you see the future of AI agents in the company? Let's start with your engineers first.
In terms of engineers, we're seeing about 90% of them use AI assistants on a daily basis, and agentic coding is beginning to take off, right? Agentic engineering. Maybe kind of taking a step back, the overall journey we're seeing with Grab, and we talked about this to the teams early last year, actually in January 2025, is we've dubbed our journey a cyborganization. We want Grab to become a cyborganization. And what we envision in this outcome on this world is Grab is a mix of human beings and agents working in concert to create customer value, to deliver customer value. And the term cyborganization comes, if you're a fan of sci-fi, you're familiar with cyborgs or cyborganisms, which are organisms which fuse together biological, organic components and technical components, right? In order to create something that is an organism that's stronger and more capable. In the same way, we're fusing together humans and agents to get work done. Now, where we are on this journey, I'd say, is worth describing in the context of like how software development was done and how we envision it will be done as we move towards the future. Now, in terms of how software development was done in the early days, or actually not early days now sounds like a long time ago, but it was actually 2022, right? People open up an IDE editor and they'd write code in that IDE. What we saw happening in late 2022 and 2023 is a move towards, I think, what you describe as autocomplete, right? But now your primary interaction has shifted from the editor to the chat window beside the editor. Now, the thing to note about both these flows is they're essentially synchronous, right? Essentially, they're kind of operating on a rhythm of back and forth with an engineer, and the engineer, therefore, is the constraint to the speed. They're the speed limiter on this development. In late last year, we saw a shift, and this is a very fundamental shift, where that control is inverted. Instead of the editor or even the code being visible to the engineer uses an agent like Claude Code or Codex or many of the others that are out there and gives a task to an agent. The agent works on it for minutes up to hours, and then the engineer reviews all the code that is outputted. So in the past, there was this synchronous, look at the code that comes out, change it as it comes out, ask the chat in the chat for it to be changed. Now you just give a task, kind of like delegating to a report, and you walk away. Or more likely, you give another agent another task. This has shifted to an asynchronous flow, which then allows starting with a one-to-one and then a one-to-many non-blocking type of flow with engineers. And you can imagine, therefore, speed really being amplified by this. The volume of code that can be generated, the original bottleneck to how software engineering worked has now been kind of de-bottlenecked. Code can be generated in reams. But like with all problems, once you solve one, a new one emerges. And this is where this field of agentic engineering has emerged, right? And the work that's coming around harness engineering is the core part. And the way to think about harness engineering, so what we're seeing in our journey as we move towards this, what engineers who are adopting this at Grab, and I'd say we're kind of seeing a bell curve here. Most folks are in the chat window, AI-assisted coding phase, and we're seeing a bleeding edge of people who are delegating the work to one or more agents at the same time. What we're seeing as the new bottleneck that has emerged is people can't review all the code that's created. Ultimately, we say you're accountable for what gets to production. How do you review it? So what we're investing in terms of harness engineering is the software engineering fundamentals, right? The first is legibility of the code base and the context to AI. AI can only act on what it knows. And also, it can only act on what it knows if you don't fill up its context window with too much information. I mean, it's the same parallel for human cognitive load. So how do you create the situation where AI or your context is legible to AI, both the business context, the code, the software engineering, so it can get the job done? This is when you give the task to AI, right? I think there's going to be an increasing investment in our context. We call it AI ergonomics as part of the broader set of things that are necessary to make AI things legible to AI so it can do the task. The other side of the picture, even as the code is generated, is how do you scale verification? How do you ensure that you can, that you don't kind of create a new bottleneck where every line of code has to be reviewed by a human being? And here's where we're investing now in automated verification. We've invested in the past, but we're really raising the bar on this side to go, how can I have automated tests that really ensure, firstly, everything runs correctly, there's no regression, but also the code that's generated is behaving as intended.
Using AI as judge, for example, is also so important, but perhaps in itself, the judge itself, the AI judge also has to be monitored. Because at some point when you're shipping something to production, I guess there's always a business owner or a engineer who's the owner who's accountable. Is that correct?
That is correct. And, we continue to, ultimately, the accountability chain doesn't end with an AI, it ends with a human being. And of course, the buck for the engineering side of things stops with me as well. So that still remains important. And so the challenge or the problem we're investing in solving is how do you scale the ability to discharge accountability, to validate and verify, even as these tools produce more and more output in terms of code.
And now we're seeing this new thing, right? That AI agents will be able to handle money. They will be able to do transactions on your behalf, which leads to all kinds of opportunities, but to give people time to do other things, but also permissions and many, many complications around that.
Yeah.
Where do you see AI? Let's say it's hard to predict, let's say in 2 years. I would usually say 5 years, but things are moving so fast. What do you think for Grab, for your team, is going to be really important in how you use AI and how you partner with AI for your colleagues?
I've come to this conclusion when I think about AI is that artificial intelligence works best when paired with real wisdom. And real wisdom involves being constantly aware of what are enduring truths, right? What are things that continue to be important even as things change around you. And I think what is something you can never go wrong with is seeing AI as a solution to a problem, but not focusing on the solution, always focusing on the problem. Even in the past, Grab was born in the inflection of smartphones, but at the time there was also a lot of new cool things coming out. NoSQL was big, cloud computing was big. And all of these things, as an engineer, they're fun to play with, right? But the real question is, hey, what are they actually going to do in terms of creating value for customers? So the first piece of advice I'd give, or how I think about it kind of in the long term, what is going to be enduring is fall in love with the customer problem. Don't fall in love with the solution. When you see a solution like AI, what it invites you to do is answer, hey, can we look at a problem we've solved already, but now we can solve it better? There are better ways to solve it that improve their experience. Or what were problems that we really couldn't solve before, that we just didn't have the tools to solve, or the tools to solve sustainably and scalably, and now we can solve them as well. So that's how we've encouraged people to approach it, to kind of see this as something that amplifies the impact and be able to solve real customer problems.
And final question, how do you use AI on a daily basis?
I think there are layers to this. The biggest use is actually, it's just a richer learning search capability. So if I want to understand something better, if I want to look up something, just briefing myself for any context, both technical concepts as well as a business meeting, it's just, you can type in, give me a brief. What does this company do? What is that? Or this technology concept. In fact, one thing I do is sometimes I go on, and I try to go on walks and exercise. And while I'm walking, I put it in kind of voice mode and I'll explore a concept while talking to it. So I'm on a phone call with a friend, right, and discussing it. The other area I use it, of course, is for coding tasks and so on, both in personal projects as well as for work projects as well. One thing we've mandated this is one of the few mandates we've put out with agentic engineering is that actually everyone, myself downwards, has to go back to school. This is a completely different way of developing software. Now, the fundamentals hold, but it's a different way of how software is developed. And so every leader in my organization is expected to deliver a change to production using agentic engineering. And through that, learn how it works, where it works, but also where it doesn't work and what needs to be done to make sure it works well.
So then, this has been a fascinating conversation. In a fast-moving AI era, how one company that serves 50 million people and more across this huge region is scaling responsibly with AI. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Ayesha.